what if I was visiting my mother and one of her friends came over and said, so what is it that you do again?
So I have to confess that my mother still doesn't understand what I do, so I
No,
probably have failed miserably in
my
that
mother
regard.
doesn't either, by the way.
How do you keep someone who might not normally be drawn to scientific topics engaged? How do you not be boring?
Dave,
Well,
you're the expert here.
I'm not an expert, but I'll give it. I mean, one thing, well, I'll say a couple things. First off, I think that, one way to keep it, I believe one way to keep an audience engaged is to keep things clear and fairly simple, right? So for example, one of the things that, I mean, I'm going to come to this when we talk about the next question, but one of the things that I think is a problem for many student talks is that their slides are too complicated, right? And people are just overwhelmed by the complexity in the slide. And so they just get lost. And I think especially if you're giving a presentation to a lay audience, slides need to be simple and they need to convey a single clear message, right? And second thing I would say is, we brought this up already, so we're starting to kind of repeat ourselves, but I think one of the most important things is to not use jargon and to not use jargony words. I mean, I think there's a tendency for students to think that science writing and science speaking has to sound a certain way. It has to have lots of these Latinized words and very long, complicated words and lots of passive phrases, passive tense phrases and things like that. And I think if people would just, instead of doing that, just use ordinary, straightforward words and clear declarative sentences, that they get their message across a lot more clearly, And so that's one thing. And then the second thing I would say is when I give some of my lectures, like I give a lecture in Physiology 209 about the action potential. And I've been doing this for like 20 years. And, it's the action potential. You know what I mean? It's not that interesting. So I talk about the brain potential and then the action potential. And I've been doing it for 20 years. And then at the end, I get these feedback from students and they're like, what I really liked about Dr. Ragsdale's lecture was he's got so much enthusiasm for the topic. And I'm thinking to myself, where did that come from? Inside, I wasn't feeling particularly any enthusiasm at all, but somehow I think that in a way that I'm not sure I understand, I seem to be conveying to them this idea that I'm enthusiastic. Maybe I'm enthusiastic about something. I'm not enthusiastic about the action potential, but maybe what it is that I'm enthusiastic about explaining it to them, right? And maybe that's what's coming across. But I think kind of energy and enthusiasm is important. That's what gets people, that seems to be important to audiences, because I get that feedback a lot. They want to feel that I'm excited about the topic that I'm talking about.
So I think in my case, it's the do as I say, not as I do example, because, my feedback from lectures is often he speaks too fast and he's really smart. And so if the audience thinks you're really smart, that must mean that you lost them at some point.
Right. That's faint praise, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. But I mean, I've listened to Ed's lectures and I think they're extremely good. I think you're a very, very good lecturer. And, so.
Thank you. That means a lot coming from
Well,
you. I guess the other thing I would recommend is that I'm somebody who needs both imagery. So some people are very verbal. I'm not a verbal person. I like to actually be able to visualize things. And so trying to use examples helps me enormously. So if it's too abstract, I end up finding myself trying to create an example in my head. So if you can describe what's happening using examples, although most analogies are flawed, but I still think that makes it easier to understand.
I totally agree. Enabling people to formulate a picture in their head. I mean, for me, again, I really also need to be able to visualize something, right? So like if I'm talking about the gas constant, it's just an equation. But for me, I have to imagine the molecules bouncing around inside the balloon, you know what I mean, to understand what pressure is. And so, regardless of the topic, I always feel like I need to have some imagery in my head,
Yeah.
There was something else I was going to say, but I forgot. I'm getting my synapses are getting a little a little fried with age.
Can you give an example of how you would give a lay summary for the work that you did in your PhD or the work that your lab currently does?
I'll take a brief shot at that. When I looked at that question, my first response was, my first thing I was thinking is, this isn't going to work because I can't, I'm not going to be able to summarize my postdoc work, in this, over Zoom. But then I thought, actually, that's not actually, it's not, like I thought about it this way. I'm like, what if I was visiting my mother and one of her friends came over and said, so what is it that you do again? Right. So I needed to summarize what I do in like 2 or 3 sentences. And I can tell you what I would say. I'm not sure if what I would say would be, that effective, but I would say something like, I study the brain. I study the cells in the brain, which are called neurons. And neurons are electrical cells, and I study a type of protein that's found in the brain that gives nerve cells their electrical property, or gives neurons their electrical properties. That's probably what I would say. That would be my 3-sentence summary of my postdoc work.
So I have to confess that my mother still doesn't understand what I do, so I probably have failed miserably in
My
that
mother
regard.
doesn't either, by the way. So
Yeah, I mean, I think she still thinks I work on ferrets, which is what I did as a doctoral student. But um, I, yeah, I don't know. I don't think I would do a fantastic job of summarizing what we work on. I think I'd probably step out of the specific model. The fact that we're looking at rewiring neurons and axons in real time and doing live imaging, that's interesting to me, but it's actually not good for a lay summary. I think the lay summary is the bigger picture. So, your brain is connected in a certain way. After having had an experience, you learn from that experience, and your brain actually physically rewires in response to that interaction. And so we're trying to understand how is it and what actually happens in your brain, experience, which is the connectivity. So I guess that's what I would say.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't study developmental neuroscience, but one of the things, if I did, I think one of the things I might say is something along the lines of, one of the most amazing things about the brain is that it builds itself, right? It puts itself together, right, with the help of input coming in from your systems and things like that. And to understand how the brain does that is, one of the great challenges of neuroscience. So
It's also an interesting debate. I mean, this is off topic, but I was recently listening to to a talk um, about deep learning and neural networks, and it's very easy to believe that you could accomplish much of what the brain accomplishes with minimal priors and just having a network that responds to or rewires in response to experience. But that's not the way the brain actually is connected and built. And so that's a really interesting debate about, for me at least, why it is that it's possible to make a functional network that learns and functions. Google does a fantastic job at translating right now, and yet we're by the time we're born, our brain is almost. I mean, humans are a little bit of an exception, but if you look at a newborn puppy, it's basically able to run around and function quite well at birth. So why is that? It's a really interesting problem.